President resolve a challenge that he was facing, which is about, should I say, legitimacy, but at the same time looking ahead into how to govern politically over the next 3 years?
I'm wondering which political crisis you're speaking to, because going into the finance bill discussion, there was a NADOC process, and there were bills that had come out of that.
NADCO.
The NADCO process and the bills that had come out of that from the last round of protests. And so there was already a process that was beginning to speak to some of these political questions. But even if you look critically at those bills and the questions framed, those questions were framed by the political elite. So I want to put it that there is really no political crisis. What we do have is a crisis of lack of leadership from the political side, in that our political leadership under the Kenya Kwanza, under William Ruto, have been unable to govern, and they've been unable to be guided by the Constitution. So they are playing on a focus of power, and the only language they seem to understand is, do we have the power, do we have the numbers, do we have our people? And the youth were actually saying, really, it's not about you, it's about us. So the crisis we have is one of a lack of appreciation of public good by our political leaders. And even when Koech speaks here as the chair of defense and says that the protests were a political maneuver, that actually is a symptom, is symptomatic of our crisis, of our political elite that can actually wish away national dissent. Because the crisis really is that the Kenya Kwanza political party, William Ruto, has lost the confidence of a majority of Kenyans, has lost the legitimacy, has lost the right to rule this country and the right to lead this country. And so the question he needed to have answered is to say, where have we failed? And how can we correct it? Had William Ruto raised those questions, I believe even the Gen Z would have agreed to dialogue. But what did he do? The Gen Z framed their issues, and that slide showed what they were, because it's about political accountability, it's about governance, it's about anti-corruption, it's about prudent resource of resources. It's not really about political deals making, not at all. In fact, the Gen Z were like, we don't care about that. And they kept saying, we're not here politically. We are here about governance, software issues, national ethos. So instead of dealing with the issues, and William Ruto's first very easy option, once he disbanded, had he been genuine, because now we can see all this was political smoke screens. This is a showman driving us through a showbiz process, and when Koech speaks here, he's part of that PR, trying to PR Kenyans. Instead of selling Kenyans an untenable position, why not just really respond to the issue? The first thing would have been vet all these people set aside. What is the constitutional process of any reappointment? Number one. Number two, what is the standard that would meet the criteria of accountability? And I want to put it to you that during the constitution making process, our politicians diluted the provisions of Chapter 6 and put in there that unless somebody has been convicted of a crime or abuse of office, they are eligible to run. So in the run-up to the 2022 election, the EACC had a list, I can't remember of how many, they might have been about 200. 241. Ineligible to run for office. Civil society then looked at, in fact, they had a separate process. They generated their own list. Their own list based on what? Based on Auditor General report, based on court records, based on COB reports, and said these people really should not be on any ticket. But what have our politicians done? They say, well, constitutionally they can run. So they put people who had murder charges, rape charges, corruption charges, put them on a ticket. Not only put them on a ticket, they wound up in political office. Further to that, after the DPP mysteriously withdrew a whole load of corruption cases, these people were then appointed, not now, these aren't competitive positions. The president appointed people who had cases, unresolved cases of corruption and abuse of office, some even murder, and appointed them into the cabinet. That is the problem. So how would the president have dealt with that problem? It's not through a political settlement. It is by dealing with that standard and saying anybody who has been charged or has ever been charged with any kind of economic crime, political crime, social blah, 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 is not eligible. If he had even wanted to go further, he should have done a vetting and said, I'm going to do a social vetting because there is the parliamentary vetting which doesn't hold water, because as we can hear the chair of defense is speaking more like the executive than he would as a representative of the people. Because our parliament is in the back pocket of the executive, he could have done a social process and said, let me know who of these you don't have confidence in. So that is what the president was expected to do. But he couldn't afford to do that because he doesn't have, he probably realized if he did that, he'll be next. Because once you appoint very good people, then the question will eventually come and say, Mr. President, can you also vet yourself? So William Ruto has an opportunity, had an opportunity which he's squandered, and I don't know whether he can change. He changes all the time. He still has time to change again for the good, to put in place a cabinet that has the confidence of the people. Instead of doing what he's done.
Are there names you feel in the proposed list that have questions of integrity?
Well, I don't even have to say I feel, who has been cited in a government report. And I'll say there's two. One, and like I mentioned, there's an ongoing case, there's an ongoing question around the conduct of Kipchumba Murkomen, who I've had the pleasure of engaging with, a very brilliant person, very articulate person. These are great resources in terms of their capability. But unfortunately, under his docket, somehow there is this corruption issue that was raised. I didn't even realize it was raised in 2018 by the Auditor General. So where is parliamentary oversight? So part of our problem is Parliament doesn't even do its job, because this issue should have been flagged then. And then, since it was flagged in 2018, how has that matter been awarded? Now, a whistleblower has leaked the documents. There was a confidential procurement for a PPP. Number one, that is not anticipated in the law. Where is the public participation? Because the PPP provisions are very clear. So how do you allow this kind of company to come in and get involved in a procurement process with the government of Kenya? And how does the CS, who sits on that? And I understand, when you interrogate these ethnic appointments, I understand we can see that there's an acting ED or general manager at KAA. There have been numerous appointments, because this is all coming out in the public domain. So numerous appointments from one ethnic community, again in the same institution. So since there is a flag, the president would have said, this is my friend, somebody I trust, but there are issues by the Auditor General and in the public domain. Let me first investigate. The other one would be Davis Churchill. He's had numerous public appointments, and in each of those, there have been major issues that have come out. Some have been cleared conclusively by the courts. In others, those investigations couldn't be completed for various reasons. So those are the kind of people
What are those reasons?
Well, you know, if you don't have sufficient evidence, you don't have sufficient documentation, you know, similar to the ICC, those cases were never determined. They collapsed because there was lack of sufficient evidence. So the point is this: the president told us he will institutionalize politics. The Gen Z have gone to the street and said, this institutionalizing of politics, where you raid the opposition politicians, where you walk all over and ignore the election rules, isn't working for us. The president also told us that he's going to run, because we met with him as civil society, and we told him, look, our debt problem is an accountability problem. We want it audited. Some of that debt should not be paid. It's odious. And he said, I want to run rules-based governance. What does rules-based mean? It means that the only standard that you will apply is a court conviction. Anybody who does anti-corruption work will tell you the weakest strategy in fighting corruption is the courts.